Croeso, this is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. This is not one, nor two, but three 40k books, and all of these were audiobooks because I've been busy. So my prop will be my trusty Legacy of Caliban, just because I like to have something to wave around, and the final of these three is a Dark Angels book, so I'm going to call that justified. The first book, however, it's the first book that I've read of its kind, and that is The Infinite and the Divine by Robert Rath. Yes, I have got my notes. And because I'm old, I remember when the Necrons were basically what they look like. They were the Terminator. They were a mystery novelty aspect of the game. They didn't really have a backstory. They didn't really have anything but, I wonder what that could be. So, apart from, they've made them Egyptian because they're now space undead, or space Tomb Kings of Khemri, I didn't really know much about them. So it was interesting having a look at this. It follows two rivals, Trazin and Orican, and it's basically, it's kind of fun. It's quite a tongue-in-cheek sort of book. It's this petty rivalry that they've got that lasts through just eons. And on the one hand, it's stupid and it's petty and it's silly. And on the other hand, it could destroy the universe, because it is a quest for the Necrons to regain what they once were when they were the Necron tier. And one of them is basically the Collector from the MCU, and is just MCU and the comics, and is just collecting all these artifacts throughout history for preservation. And the other one is a sorcerer type who is a little bit more proactive and doesn't just want to collect these artifacts, he wants to use them. So that's the premise of this. And all through time, through centuries and millennia, they clash over this particular MacGuffin, and it's sometimes a bit fun. I think I gave this 3 stars because it's well written, but there are some definite flaws in it. A big flaw is it's a 2-man show. If you're not invested in either of these two, the book is completely wasted. There's nobody else, really. They have some scenes in a court where they're answerable to this panel of judges, and those scenes were some of the best. So if they'd had a little bit more of that, I think I would have enjoyed it more. The other thing I didn't like was we have these big fights between them where they pull out their various technology and sorcery and techno-sorcery and whatnot. But it was very reminiscent of when you see superhero fights, and you've essentially got two people who can't really hurt each other, and the majority of the fight is therefore quite dull, because you know neither one is really capable of doing serious harm to the other, and that robs it of its tension. So there was that. What did make it a lot of fun was it clearly doesn't take itself that seriously, and there were loads of little nuggets for the Games Workshop geek. I'm pretty sure there's a reference to Gorka Morka in there, which is a properly obscure little game. And the little things that show you just how detached from reality, or from a human's concept of reality, these Necrons are. Because they have a play which lasts for 10 years. Because the actors don't need to eat or sleep or urinate or defecate. Nobody needs to be anywhere else. Everyone's got all the time in the world because they are immortal and they're eons and eons old. So yes, a play can be 10 years long, because why not? And there's another bit where, in one of their sort of rare moments where they're on the same side for a moment, they're sitting watching a different play, and suddenly it all erupts into violence. And he says, "What on earth did you bring me here for?" And just a deadpan, "Well, it's had very good reviews." And yet little things like that made it fun. And it's a shame that it felt the need to have so much action, because that wasn't its strong point. The fun was the strong point, and that's where I think the focus should really have been. But that is just my opinion. It's The Infinite and the Divine. Again, I don't have it with me because it was an audiobook. But have a look if you're into it. I found it interesting as someone who hasn't read a Necrons book before. The next one on our list is The Unremembered Empire. And I've been enjoying these because it's within the Horus Heresy, but it's a little mini trilogy within it, which is about Imperium Secundus. And I mean, if you don't know anything about 40k, why are you even watching this video? But if you don't know about this portion of the heresy, the Ruin Storm has isolated Ultramar, and Guilliman is essentially having to act on the assumption that the Emperor is dead, and that Earth has fallen, or Terra has fallen, and is having this bit of an inner conflict about, well, we're going to set up this second empire, Imperium Secundus, but who should be in charge of it? I mean, it's my little empire anyway, is it the 500 Worlds, the Ultimar mini segmentum or whatever, but he doesn't want to call himself an emperor, and there's what I think is an unnecessary, I couldn't possibly call myself a regent. Well, that's literally what you are, and if it turns out the Emperor's alive, then it's fine. But he does a lot of agonising about that. And this little miniature empire is being formed. Now, the last one we had was No No Fear, which I didn't like as much. I think it was the tense. I think that was the one where we were doing things in present tense, and I didn't like it. But this one was a vast improvement. I'm going to go through a couple of the negatives I've noticed first. I wasn't keen on Vulcan, and perhaps it's because I haven't read Vulcan Lives, but he just didn't seem particularly interesting. I didn't like, minor spoiler, I didn't like that John Grammaticus is in this book. I just think he's overused. It's a nice idea, this idea of John Grammaticus, this ultimate spy, and the Cabal, and the Perpetuals, and everything. That's potentially a very interesting idea, but I found a couple of times it is very overused, and an awful lot of this book, it's just given over to John Grammaticus doing his thing, and I think we could have done better with just having some little chapters, some little snippets, because his whole thing is operating in the shadows. Well, just have a couple of snippets that show actually he was behind a lot of this all along, rather than devoting big chunks to him, because I personally don't find him that interesting. However, I missed my last little negative. And again, minor spoiler, but not really. I don't have the book with me to show the cover, but the cover is Guilliman holding up Sanguinius's arm, clearly proclaiming him something. Now, first off, for a book where there's a lot of agonising about, who should lead us, and a book where Sanguinius only shows up pretty near the end, that's a very spoilery thing to put on the front cover, because you're essentially saying, here's how it ends. Mime cover. So there was that. But it had the lion in it, and it had the Dark Angels doing their little homage to A Few Good Men by twirling their bolters around in this big elaborate parade, and 25,000 of them just appear, and I really like the relationship we have when it first strikes with Guilliman and the Lion, because I've always kind of liked the Dark Angels, and Guilliman has shown in the last book, and more so in this book, that he's arguably the most human of the Primarchs, and having him, the way he looks at the Lion, even though they haven't grown up together, it is very much an older brother relationship. And so I do like the way he's almost intimidated by him, but at the same time isn't afraid to not quite put his foot down firmly, but to say, no, here is the situation, we must do it in this way. And the Lion was considering just killing him because he thinks maybe he's setting himself up as another emperor. And I just really liked that dynamic. And Kurz is always a fun spanner to throw in the works. And the lion's secrecy, which is always sort of his downfall, and that he seems to think is his strength, that all comes into it. And I thought that really made it work. It really made up for all the little minor nigglings that I've noted down. So Unremembered Empire, I will strongly recommend. It's Dan Abnett, which normally means good. Sometimes there are ones of his that I haven't been keen on, but he's pretty consistent with writing good books, and this is definitely one of them. So, Unremembered Empire. Now I'm going to start holding up Legacy of Caliban again, mainly because it has a Dark Angel on the cover. Because the next one we're looking at is Angels of Caliban, and this one's by Gav Thorpe, and I think Gav Thorpe's had a lot to do with the Dark Angels. Now this one was good. It reinforces my hashtag Luther did nothing wrong. It has Astellan in it, and we have, compared to the last Dark Angel book I read, we have a lot of good, interesting stuff going on. And we have the Ouroboros and the Watchers in the Dark and all of that stuff that you want from a Dark Angels book. It's in there. But also, because it's part of the Imperium Secundus series, we also have what the Lion is up to in this new empire. And he's now having to interact with Sanguinius as well, who is a difficult man to read, because he doesn't want to be emperor, and he's quite angry that he's been put in this position, but at the same time, just when you don't want him to, he decides to be stubborn and say, well, I'm the one in charge. And that's fun. I've made a note here of something I wanted to mention, and then I realised, no, you can't mention that because that's a massive spoiler. But there is a scene nearish to the end which features multiple Primarchs, and the conflict is brilliant because you've seen the build-up to it, and it's not the conflict you'd think it would be. We've got Sanguinius and the Lion and Guilliman and Kurz. They all go into a bar, and it is just cracking writing, the way that each one's personality comes through in this no-win scenario that they find themselves in. And yeah, it really sold that book to me. That book was interesting anyway, but that conflict there, that really sold it. The other note I've made, I've already mentioned, is of Guilliman being shown once again as being the most human of them, but also as being the most morally sound of them. It's very rare in the 40k universe to find anybody who you could even vaguely describe as morally sound, and Guilliman is kind of the closest thing we've got to it. So that is interesting. It's almost a shame that my beloved Space Wolves are such dicks to him, but they're all right in the end, and it's fine, and I like the wolves as well. That being dicks is just what they do. I'm going to leave that there. My two favourite legions, who unfortunately are arch enemies, the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, and both of them causing a little trouble for the only morally sound leader in 40k, so make of that what you will. Okay, I'm going to cover the title, because that's not what it is, but just for the sake of a visual representation, that's a Dark Angel. Right, I think I've rambled enough about 40k. This is Sci-Fi for the Ultimate Geek, and this is James, aka JP Harker. Well vowed.